The Galactic Academy of Interspecies Studies prided itself on being the most inclusive educational institution in 7-star systems, which made it all the more ironic that Tessa Morgan couldn't get through a single class without someone mentioning, usually with a combination of horror and fascination, that she came from a death world. Today we'll be discussing adaptive evolutionary traits across Class 3 through Class 8 planetary environments. Professor Glick Glorp announced his 3 eye stalks swiveling independently to survey the classroom. One eye inevitably lingered a second too long on Tessa. While most civilized species evolve in hospitable environments conducive to higher thinking, some remarkable exceptions persist. Tessa sank lower in her seat, which had been modified with additional padding after the original crystalline structure had cracked under her excessive density. Behind her, Sloop, a gelatinous membranite, gurgled something to his seatmate that made them both vibrate in the membranite equivalent of laughter. "Did you know," Sloop whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear, "that humans drink dihydrogen monoxide for fun? The same compound that causes metal to oxidize." "Actually," corrected Plex, a 4-armed Ventosian with bright orange fur, "I heard they intentionally expose their epidermis to radiation from their home star until it changes color, for aesthetic purposes." Professor Glick Glorp's feeding tendrils wriggled with amusement. "Now students, let's maintain decorum. We're fortunate to have a representative from Earth joining us this semester. Their survival despite their planet's hostile conditions is educational." Tessa remained silent, as she had every day since orientation. Her datapad displayed detailed notes on xenobiology while her classmates' comments washed over her like water off a duck's back. She'd heard it all before. Earth's gravity was crushing, its atmosphere corrosive, its temperature range lethal, its biosphere a nightmare of predators and poisons. Little did they know that everything that made Earth terrible was exactly what made Tessa Morgan magnificent. But they would find out soon enough. 3 standard weeks into the semester, midway through Professor Glick Glorp's lecture on why atmospheric nitrogen is considered a toxin on civilized worlds, the Academy's emergency system activated with a piercing wail that made several auditory-dominant species collapse in pain. "Attention, Galactic Academy students and faculty," a mechanical voice intoned. "This is not a drill. The campus is under lockdown due to external security threat. Krex Dominion vessels have breached planetary defenses. Hostile forces estimated to reach campus in 27 minutes. Remain in your current locations and await further instructions." The classroom erupted into chaos. Ventosian Plex shed tufts of orange fur in distress. 3 membranites merged into a panicked puddle. Professor Glick Glorp's eye stalks retracted so quickly they made a popping sound. "The Krex," squeaked Lumi, a bioluminescent photoid whose glow had dimmed to a terrified flicker. "But why would they attack an academic institution?" "Because," Tessa spoke for the first time all semester, her voice cutting through the pandemonium like a laser through fog, "the Academy's quantum computing lab just announced a breakthrough in cryptographic sequencing." She stood up and somehow seemed taller than before. "The Krex military encryption is based on that exact technology. 27 pairs of alien eyes, stalks, sensory pits and photoreceptors swiveled toward her. "How do you know that?" Professor Glick Glorp demanded, his feeding tendrils quivering. "I read the news," Tessa replied with a shrug that might have been the first sign of the magnificent sarcasm to come. "Also, there's a tactical map on the emergency system." She walked to the front of the classroom and activated the holographic display. With practiced movements, she expanded the campus layout and highlighted the approaching Krex vessels. "Those are military-grade landing craft," she continued, pointing to angular shapes descending through the atmosphere. "Not designed for mass destruction but for infiltration and asset seizure. They're not here to destroy the Academy. They want something." Zloop emerged from the membranite puddle long enough to ask, "What do we do?" "The campus security forces are mainly ceremonial. We have 25 minutes to prepare," Tessa said, her eyes scanning the classroom as if seeing it for the first time. "This room has 2 entrances, reinforced walls and enough chemical compounds to make things very uncomfortable for anyone who tries to enter without permission." Professor Glick Glorp's eye stalks re-extended in shock. "Miss Morgan, what exactly are you suggesting?" Tessa's lips curled into what humans would recognize as a smile, but what most alien species present interpreted as a terrifying display of bone and predatory intent. "I'm suggesting, Professor, that it's time for a practical lesson in death world survival." "First things first," Tessa announced, scanning the classroom with the efficiency of someone who definitely wasn't just a regular exchange student. "We need to assess our resources and capabilities." She pointed at Plex, "You Ventosian. 4 arms means you can manipulate multiple objects simultaneously, correct?" Plex's fur bristled with indignation. "I have a name, you know, and yes, I can perform complex multi-appendage tasks that your primitive bilateral symmetry could never." "Great. You're on chemical duty," Tessa interrupted. already moving on. Zaloop and fellow Membranites, your ability to flow through small spaces makes you perfect for reconnaissance. But we're not combatants, protested Zaloop, his gelatinous form quivering. The Krex will vaporize us. Tessa shook her head. They won't vaporize what they can't see, and I'm betting your species evolved some kind of natural camouflage on your homeworld. Well, yes, admitted Zaloop reluctantly. We can adjust our refractive properties to blend with surroundings, but that's for hiding from Glax beasts during mating season, not military operations. Today it's for military operations, Tessa declared. Professor Glick-Glorp, what dangerous compounds do we have access to in this classroom? The professor's eye stalks crossed in confusion. This is a xenobiology classroom, not a weapons depot. Though, the preservation solutions in Cabinet 3 would cause severe respiratory distress in most oxygen-breathing species. Perfect. And the fire suppression system uses what exactly? Standard carbon dioxide foam, but we can work with that. Tessa nodded, already moving toward the supply cabinets. Lumi, your species can modulate light output, correct? How bright can you go? The photoid pulsed nervously. In emergency situations, bright enough to temporarily blind most visual-dependent species. But it's extremely draining. Save it for when we need it most, Tessa advised. Now everyone listen carefully. She quickly outlined her plan, utilizing the classroom's layout and their unique biological abilities. The fire suppression system would be rewired to deploy on command. The ventilation system would be used to disperse the preservation chemicals in a controlled manner. Membranites would monitor Krex movements. Ventotians would prepare chemical deterrents. That's insane, Professor Glick-Glorp sputtered, his feeding tendrils writhing. We're academics, not soldiers. This isn't some primitive death world where violence is the answer to every problem. Tessa fixed him with a level gaze. With all due respect, Professor, I've spent all semester listening to lectures about how humans evolved on a planet so harsh that it's a miracle we developed intelligence at all. But here's what you missed in your analysis. Surviving on a death world isn't just about physical adaptation, it's about creativity, resourcefulness, and refusing to accept defeat. She pointed to the emergency display showing multiple Krex vessels approaching. Those soldiers are coming from a standardized military environment. They expect standardized responses. They're not prepared for death world tactics. Professor Glick-Glorp's eye stalks drooped slightly. And what exactly are death world tactics, Miss Morgan? Tessa's grin returned, wider and somehow more terrifying than before. Fighting dirty, Professor. Very, very dirty. 13 minutes later, the first Krex patrol reached the Academy's East Wing. Through the classroom's visual feed, enhanced by Zloop's brave reconnaissance mission, they watched 6 armored soldiers march down the corridor. The Krex were reptilian humanoids with reinforced exoskeletons, and what appeared to be very functional plasma rifles. Those are JX-47 combat units, Tessa muttered, eyes narrowed at the display. Military-grade armor with environmental seals. We're doomed, whispered Plex, now balancing 4 different containers of chemicals that Tessa had instructed him to mix. Not yet, we're not, Tessa replied. Environmental seals have to have sensory inputs, otherwise they're just fancy coffins, and every input is a potential vulnerability. She tapped her comm unit. Membranite team, are you in position? Affirmative, came Zloop's wavering voice. Though I must register my continued objection to this suicide mission. Objection noted, Tessa responded dryly. Remember, deploy the first solution at junction B7, then immediately proceed to the ventilation shaft. Do not, I repeat, do not engage directly. The class watched as the Membranites oozed from their hiding spots, just long enough to spill vials of Professor Glick-Glorp's preservation solution across the corridor floor. The liquid spread rapidly, releasing an invisible vapor that the visual feed couldn't capture. The effect on the Krex patrol, however, was immediately evident. What is this? The lead soldier barked, his voice distorted through his helmet speaker, sensors detecting unknown chemical compound. Another soldier staggered, his movements becoming erratic. It's penetrating the external filters, secondary containment compromised. Those are top-of-the-line military environmental suits, gasped Professor Glick-Glorp. How did our basic preservation compound bypass their protections? Tessa's expression remained focused. Because your basic preservation compound contains trace amounts of neurodisruptive agents that your species is immune to, but which play havoc with reptilian nervous systems. I read the safety warnings on the bottle. The Krex soldiers were now in full retreat, several moving with jerky, uncoordinated motions as their nervous systems rebelled. Fall back, ordered their leader. Deploy hazard protocols and alert command. Once they disappeared around a corner, a cheer erupted from the classroom. We did it, exclaimed Lumi, glowing brightly in excitement. No, Tessa corrected, already moving to phase 2 of her plan. We won the first skirmish. Now they know we can fight back, which makes us a threat rather than just an obstacle. Their next approach will be more aggressive. Professor Glick-Glorp's eye stalks swiveled toward her. How do you know so much about military tactics, Miss Morgan? I was under the impression you were a xenobiology student. I am, Tessa replied, not looking up from the makeshift barricade she was constructing. But on Earth, understanding both predator and prey behavior isn't just academic, it's survival. The Academy's emergency system blared again. Warning, hostile forces have breached the main hall. All personnel implement shelter protocols. Tessa checked the time. They're advancing faster than I anticipated. Everyone to your positions. Remember what I told you, they expect us to hide or surrender. Our advantage is doing the unexpected. As the class scrambled to their assigned duties, Plex approached Tessa with newfound respect in his four-eyed gaze. For a species from a backwater death world, he admitted grudgingly, you're surprisingly competent. Tessa allowed herself a small smile. That's the thing about Deathworlders, Plex. We're full of surprises. Commander Vexcor, we have a situation. The Krex lieutenant's scales flushed a dark crimson, indicating embarrassment, or possibly an allergic reaction to whatever those Academy vermin had deployed. On the bridge of the Krex command vessel, Commander Vexcor slammed his armored fist against the tactical display. Explain how an elite unit was repelled by unarmed academics. Sir, they used some kind of neurological agent that penetrated our filtration systems. 3 soldiers are experiencing motor control failures. Vexcor's pupils contracted to dangerous slits. Unacceptable. Deploy the heavy assault unit with full-spectrum protective measures. I want that quantum encryption algorithm secured within the hour. Back at the Academy, Tessa was leading her impromptu militia through the cafeteria, gathering supplies that made absolutely no sense to her alien companions. Cooking oil, salt, sweetening agents. Professor Glick-Glorp's confusion manifested as rapid eye stalk rotations. Miss Morgan, this is hardly the time for a culinary experiment. On the contrary, Professor, Tessa replied, hefting a large container of viscous liquid. This is exactly the time for chemistry, practical, messy, deathworld chemistry. She directed Plex and 2 other Ventosians to position containers at strategic points along the corridors leading to their classroom. The Member Knights had reported that a larger Krex force was assembling in the main atrium, this time with heavier weapons and enhanced protective gear. They've adapted to our first attack, Tessa explained. So we changed tactics. Lumi, are you ready for your big moment? The photoaid pulsed nervously. I can generate approximately 45 seconds of maximum luminosity before requiring cellular regeneration. That should be enough. Tessa nodded. Everyone else remember when I give the signal. Seal your sensory organs however your species does it. This is going to get unpleasant. The heavy thud of armored boots announced the Krex approach. Their new formation was cautious, weapons raised, with scanning equipment preceding them. Through the surveillance feed, Tessa watched as they methodically checked for chemical traps. They're being smart now, she muttered. Time for something stupid. She activated the classroom communication system and broadcast her voice through the corridor speakers. Attention Krex forces. This is Tessa Morgan, Earth representative to the Galactic Academy. You are violating Section 7 of the Interstellar Academic Sovereignty Treaty. The Krex commander laughed, the sound distorted through his helmet. An Earth Deathworlder, your primitive treaties mean nothing to the Dominion. I wasn't finished, Tessa continued, her voice unnervingly calm. I was going to add that while you're technically breaking galactic law, I'm about to break your entire squadron. She gave the signal. Lumi floated to the center of the junction ahead of the Krex unit and unleashed a solar-level burst of pure white light. Even through the surveillance feed, temporarily snowblinded students recoiled. For the Krex, with their enhanced visual sensors calibrated for maximum sensitivity, after the darkness of space travel, the effect was devastating. Disoriented and temporarily blinded, they stumbled forward, directly onto the prepared floor. The combination of cooking oil, specific mineral salts, and sweetening compounds had created a surface that was not merely slippery, but actively degrading to the metallic components of their armor. What is this? Roared the Krex commander as his soldiers crashed into each other, their movements throwing them off balance on the treacherous surface. Basic chemistry, Tessa answered through the speaker. Certain oils combined with specific salts create a reaction that accelerates oxidation in common metals, or as we Deathworlders call it, rust. The Krex watched in horror as their state-of-the-art armor began to deteriorate, joint mechanisms seizing up, environmental seals breaking down. Now Professor, Tessa called out. Professor Glick-Glorp, who had finally embraced his role in this madness, activated the modified fire suppression system. Instead of standard suppression foam, it now dispensed a mixture of cafeteria vegetable matter and the remaining preservation solution, a combination that reacted violently with the compromised Krex armor, creating a rapidly hardening substance. Within minutes, the entire Krex assault team was immobilized in what could only be described as academic quicksand. The Krex commander, half submerged in the hardening mixture, managed to activate his emergency communication. Commander Vexcor, we require immediate extraction. The Academy is defended by what, Lieutenant? Vexcor's voice crackled through the comm. The lieutenant stared at Tessa, who now stood before him with arms crossed and a distinctly predatory smile. By a Deathworlder, sir, he finished weakly. The Galactic Academy's central plaza buzzed with activity 3 days after what was already being called the Krex incident. Emergency response teams from the Galactic Council had arrived within hours of Commander Vexcor's humiliating retreat. The sight of an entire Krex assault force, some still partially encased in hardened cafeteria goop, being escorted off-world had drawn spectators from across the campus. In Professor Glickglorp's classroom, the atmosphere had undergone a transformation as profound as the physical changes to the room itself. Scorch marks decorated one wall where a desperate Krex soldier had discharged his weapon before being subdued by a cascade of engineered microorganisms from the biology lab's sample storage. The professor's desk now bore the distinctive melted pattern of what Tessa had called an exothermic reaction, but what everyone else recognized as a controlled explosion. Most noticeably, the seating arrangement had changed. Where Tessa had once sat isolated at the front, she now occupied the center of the classroom, surrounded by students who had, just days earlier, mocked her primitive origins. As I was saying before our recent interruption, Professor Glickglorp continued his lecture, all three eye stalks now regarding Tessa with unmistakable respect. Evolutionary adaptations often reflect the challenges of native environments. Recent events have provided us with a rather vivid demonstration of this principle. Zloop, whose gelatinous form bore a slightly bluer tint since his heroic reconnaissance missions, raised a pseudopod. Professor, I believe our curriculum should be updated. Specifically, the classification of Earth as simply a high-gravity death world with primitive technology seems increasingly inadequate. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the classroom. Plex, who had taken to sitting directly beside Tessa, nodded vigorously, causing his orange fur to shimmer. Indeed, Professor Glickglorp conceded. Perhaps a more nuanced understanding is warranted. Miss Morgan, would you care to enlighten us about what aspects of human evolution might have been overlooked in standard xenobiological texts? All eyes turned to Tessa, who sat with the relaxed posture of someone finally able to be herself. The perpetual tension that had characterized her presence had melted away, replaced by a confident ease that somehow made her seem both more approachable and more formidable. The biggest misconception, she began, is that Earth's physical challenges, gravity, atmospheric composition, predators, are what make it a death world. Those factors shaped our biology, sure, but what truly defined human evolution was adaptability itself. We became specialists in being generalists. She gestured toward the various species in the room. Many advanced species evolved perfect adaptations to stable environments. Humans evolved to handle constant change and uncertainty. We're not the strongest, fastest, or most naturally armored species, but we might be the most creative when backed into a corner. That explains the cooking oil and sweetener combination. Lumi pulsed thoughtfully. Their bioluminescence now returned to normal after recovering from the energy expenditure of their heroic light blast. No galactic military tactical manual would include cafeteria supplies as weapons. Exactly, Tessa nodded. The Krex expected standard defense protocols. They weren't prepared for improvisation. Professor Glickglorp cleared his throat, a sound like bubbles rising through thick syrup. While your insights are valuable, Miss Morgan, there remains the matter of your rather sophisticated understanding of military tactics. Our admissions records indicate you enrolled as a standard exchange student with no specialized training. The classroom fell silent. Tessa sighed, then straightened in her chair. Officially, I am a standard exchange student, she acknowledged. Unofficially, I spent 6 years in Earth's Combined Defense Force as a tactical specialist before retiring to pursue xenobiology. The Galactic Council was aware of my background when approving my application to the Academy. You were a soldier? Plex asked, his 4 eyes widening. A strategist, actually, Tessa corrected, specialized in asymmetric response scenarios. Turns out understanding how different species think and fight is useful both in military planning and xenobiology. She shrugged. I came here hoping to leave that part of my life behind. To just be a student for once. So the silent human in class, began Zloop, was trying to avoid drawing attention, Tessa finished. Fat lot of good that did. A message flashed across the classroom display. Attention, Tessa Morgan to report to Dean Neria's office immediately. Speaking of attention, Tessa muttered, gathering her things. As she stood to leave, Professor Glickglorp extended a formal tentacle gesture of respect, the first time he had done so to any student. Miss Morgan, regardless of the administrative proceedings to follow, I wish to convey my personal gratitude. Your actions saved not only this class but potentially the entire academy. Tessa accepted the gesture with a proper tentacle wave in return, a movement she had clearly practiced but never had occasion to use until now. Thank you, Professor. Though if it's all the same to you, I'd prefer we return to regular xenobiology lectures. Fighting off invading armies is exhausting. As she reached the door, Plex called out, "Will you still sit with us at lunch? We have questions about other Earth survival techniques." Tessa paused, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Sure, but fair warning, the stories about how we use capsaicin as a food additive are completely true." A horrified gasp rippled through the classroom, followed by eager murmurs of fascination. As the door closed behind her, Tessa could hear Professor Glickglorp beginning a hastily improvised lecture on voluntary toxin consumption in Deathworld species. The paradox of human cuisine. Some things about humans, it seemed, would always remain terrifying to the galactic community, but at least now, in this classroom, terror had been replaced with something new: respect. In the hallway, Dean Thrixnall waited with a delegation from the Galactic Council. Their expressions suggested that Tessa's quiet academic career was about to become considerably more complicated, but that was a problem for another day. For now she was simply satisfied that she'd finally found her voice, and in doing so, had taught an important lesson about underestimating species from Deathworlds, especially the quiet ones.